Hey guys, welcome back to Ripestories. In this video, a racist entitled Karen coworker is mad that I speak multiple languages and reported me to the manager claiming I disrupted the work environment. Let's dive right into the video. And the title story is called My Racist Entitled Karen coworker is mad that I speak multiple languages. So I'm a female university student who recently turned 21. During this time, I chose to work part-time at a cafe to support myself through school. I had a coworker named Melanie in her mid-20s. I've always butted heads with her. We never seemed to agree on anything, so much so that I'd considered switching shifts, but I was not able to fit it into my schedule. Well, despite everything else, it seemed like the biggest gripe she had about me was the fact that I spoke multiple languages. Well, how dare you? I came from Central Europe, so it was normal to learn more than one language in school. For reference and for the importance of the story, I also speak Spanish, German and Dutch, although I have an accent at times. And by the way guys, let me know in the comments which languages can you speak? The cafe was a hotspot for tourists, so I felt lucky to have the chance to use these languages when I could. This had never been a problem for customers, and my manager was grateful that I could get a better response. It only started becoming a problem whenever I spoke around Melody. Just speak English, we don't have time for you to show off. She would always say that whenever we had a foreign customer, but if I knew their language, then I would always try to speak since I knew it would make them feel more at ease. Melanie called me a spoiled white girl who used her dad's money and told me to be grateful for having the privilege of knowing multiple languages. You're lucky your family's rich. You've never had to work hard to get where you are. She assumed that only privileged people could have the resources and free time to learn different languages, and I told her that I actually came from a poor family and that I'd never even met my father, but whatever her reasons or thought process were, she didn't have the right to speak to me that way. No matter how much I would argue against it, she wouldn't let up. I got fed up to the point where I asked another female coworker who was Polish what her problem was. She's probably a racist, just don't get involved with her. What did she do to you? Well, she got mad at me when I didn't tell her that I was Polish. I had suspected the same thing, but even if I wanted to, I still could not change my shifts. Afterwards, Melanie would constantly berate me about my supposed privilege, telling me how it is disgusting that I don't acknowledge it and that I should stop trying to speak other languages with my accent since she believed that it was cultural appropriation. It even got to the point where she would compare herself with me, saying that she'd be able to do everything better if she had the same opportunities as me. Thankfully, I never had to see her outside of work since I'd never willingly met her after everything she said. At one point, Melanie had tried reporting me to the manager, claiming that I was disrupting the work environment and driving away other customers by speaking to people in their native language. This was obviously shot down and my relationship with her became even shakier, but since she was still my coworker, I just had to put up with it. Anyway, there was another coworker who was near my age, Mark, whom I actually had feelings for. He would always help me whenever we had to close and clean up the shop, and as it turns out, he spoke Spanish as a native language, so we would often speak it whenever we talked. Even though we got along well, I didn't have time to hang out with him after my shift was over, since my schedule was filled with schoolwork. Luckily, a few weeks later, when I had a break, my coworkers had invited me out. I was excited that I finally had a chance to hang out with them. However, it also turned out that Melanie had also been invited alongside Mark. It was awkward when I arrived after seeing her, since I avoided eye contact. Thankfully, Mark was there and we found our own little corner to chat. I came out of nowhere. It was a catchphrase from a character he had drawn as a kid. I felt happy he was comfortable sharing his childhood experiences with me. I'd always make sure to say it with two fingers poking out from both sides of my forehead since the character had horns and would jump out and scare people. No, you have to add more pizzas when you say it like this. Mark did the same thing, but instead he used his entire hand and wriggled his fingers, which made it more creepy, but that was probably the whole point. Anyway, we spent the entire party exchanging jokes and TV shows and other things we did as kids without interacting much with the rest of the group. I would sometimes throw Spanish words into our conversations, and he would laugh about how I pronounced things like a character from a TV show, since that was how I learned the language. During the party, I would occasionally catch Melanie watching me, even when she would be talking to other people, but I was having too much fun to care about her then. The next day we continued work as usual. After the party, Mark and I I had gotten closer and I thought he maybe even liked me back. A few days later, near the end of the week, Melanie wanted to play some games with me during break time. It was the first time she had asked me something like this, but I was not gonna turn away the opportunity, even if it was her. "Who's your favorite coworker?" "I don't want to play favorites, those never end well. It's just a question." She started with simple games, but as we progressed into deeper and personal questions, I found out that she liked Mark as well. I wouldn't say I did not have any suspicions during the party, but I was too distracted to think about it. At one point, she asked me about the languages I spoke: German, Spanish and Dutch. Melanie whistled, but I could see she was faking being impressed. She scrambled around for her phone and pulled it out of her pocket, opening Google Translate. "Prove it." She asked me to repeat the same questions we had played during the games, which I did without much difficulty. However, I could see a light bulb pop over her head when she eventually switched to Spanish. I didn't know what she was planning at the time, but given the party and her crush on Mark, it turned out that she was planning on embarrassing me for my accent. She probably thought I was showing off to Mark when speaking it. Once again, she brought out Google Translate and asked a question in Spanish. Before I could even finish responding, she stopped me and made fun of my accent. "Why do you say it like that? It sounds completely different." I tried to tell her that my accent came from watching Argentinian soap operas, but she instantly ridiculed me and called me a liar, telling me to admit that it wasn't good and even going as far as to laugh in my face. She called over our coworkers and tried to get them to join her. Needless to say though, everyone was awkward in the whole situation. Melanie was rambling off by herself about my accent and kept laughing. Eventually Mark came and chimed in that my accent was correct and sounded good. "You don't have to spare her feelings, Mark. She has to accept that she's not good at everything." I broke out in a fit of laughter, which seemed to have pissed her off more. "And you shouldn't speak about things you know nothing about." Mark backed me up and insisted that she must apologize. When it seemed that nobody was on Melanie's side, she began to break down, yelling at everyone, me especially. "Why are you all on her side? She's not even from here." We were all shocked. I knew she had her views, but I never expected she would go as far as this. Just then, she rushed at me and smacked my face, yelling profanities. Mark instantly separated the two of us as my coworkers came to check on me. Melanie began melting into a sobbing mess, saying over and over that it was my fault she had done this. I didn't do anything to her then, but looking back on it, I probably would have felt better if I had retaliated a little more. Our manager quickly came out to see what the fuss was about. After having everything explained to him, he decided to close up shop since it was still the middle of the day and he couldn't have two employees fight in front of customers. Mark walked me home that day, and on the way we talked about random things such as what we would eat for dinner tomorrow, our favorite board games, or even our favorite rock bands if we had any. It felt natural talking to him that the whole situation was sent to the back of my mind. I didn't even remember what I was upset about a moment ago. Once we got to my apartment, I asked if he wanted to come in to watch some movies, to which he agreed. After boiling tea, or maybe some hot coffee. By the way, does anyone get that reference? It is from GTA San Andreas. Anyway, we fought over what movie we were gonna watch until eventually, through a game of rock, paper, scissors, Mark settled on Saw. I didn't enjoy scary movies all that much, but it felt peaceful spending quality time with him. Once the movie was over, the sun had already begun setting and Mark was getting ready to leave. I told him that he could stay since he had already made it this far. He seemed reluctant at first, so I also added board games to the table. Mark practically beamed with enthusiasm and we played Monopoly and the occasional round of chess for a while before we started to get sleepy. Eventually, one thing led to another, and I can say for sure that he did like me back. Well, in the morning, a knock came from the door. Unexpectedly, Melanie had come to my home for the first time. I thought she was gonna apologize for the way she had acted towards me, but she started blaming me for all of it. "Why'd you have to come here? It is all your fault." She started ranting about everything I'd done, from talking to customers to my relationships with other coworkers. She started throwing profanities at me and cursing me for being a foreigner. Even though I've avoided her when I could, she even started blaming me for her shortcomings at work, and just then Mark called me from inside the house saying that he was getting ready. When I looked back at Melanie, her jaw had dropped and she was red in the face. She couldn't say anything. "I would see you at work." I closed the door and got ready with Mark. When I arrived at work, I could tell Melanie was fuming. She kept lashing out at everyone who tried talking to her and kept rushing customers to order and overall growing impatient. In the afternoon, our manager called her into the hot seat of his office where I could hear her getting grilled. It wasn't much of a surprise that she was fired, especially with yesterday's outburst, but she threw me the finger after she walked out the door. Luckily, I never saw her again and knew my coworkers were all relieved that the workplace could go back to normal normal. Back to the present though, I'm still going through university and I've even talked with Mark about moving in together. I still work at the cafe and have gotten to know everyone else well enough that I could even call them my friends. And yeah guys, I'm proud of OP that the situation got resolved and this Karen got fired, or I guess this Melanie got fired. That is exactly what she deserved, and I hope OP has a nice workplace environment now. And by the way, if you enjoy these retail/workplace drama stories, please don't forget to like the video and share a comment. The next one is titled, "Sorry you revoked my overtime privileges yesterday." So this was several years ago when I worked at a redacted big name coffee shop. My shift was 5 AM to 1:30 PM, and often around 1 PM, giant groups of kids on school field trips would come through the area. This was a coffee shop located in a major CA city, very close to a bunch of museums. I'd been working a lot of overtime because of it to help my coworkers through the rush. I got written up by my supervisor for doing too many overtime shifts without approval. I was explicitly informed to not work overtime again. I had lost overtime privileges until corporate deemed I could have them again, and working overtime again prior to that would result in further disciplinary action. The day after I was written up, right as my shift ended, 3 big buses full of kids unloaded and filled the shop. At 1:30 PM on the dot, my watch alarm went off and I went to go clock out. The store manager who wrote me up the day prior said, "Wait, where are you going?" I reminded her that I had lost my overtime privileges, clocked out, retrieved the shift drink I'd made for myself right before the rush, and left. The next day, I was informed my overtime privileges had been reinstated. Edit, whoa, this took off in a way I didn't expect. So, to clarify, this was almost a decade ago when I was in my early 20s and an eager-to-please employee, so I didn't demand that they take the write-up off my record. Unfortunately, my coworkers all knew about the write-up and were pissed about it too, so none of them were mad when I spied left to prove a point. I worked a super morning shift by choice because I used to be a morning person, because the field trips were super sporadic and there was no way to predict them without knowing the field trip schedules of the entire region, and our manager had somehow managed to avoid ever experiencing one, since she typically left around noon. Once she saw what they were like and started believing us, they scheduled one of the afternoon shift people to come in an hour early so we had better overlap. And the next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story that is titled, "About 5 years ago, my company brought in an individual to see if my position was no longer needed. Well, I passed with flying colors. Not to give too much info away, I was hired at an organization as a job title of basically helper, and well, for someone who's supposed to just be helping, I had a ridiculous amount of work. Almost all of my coworkers were huge technologically illiterate boomers, so I actually sort of thrived in this environment as a very useful person. For example, one guy would spend half his day copying items and passing them into another program that we use. He did not even use Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V, he would right-click and then copy and then go into the Files menu or something and insert copied item from clipboard. He was so proud of himself when he showed me because, "Don't worry, you won't have to retype everything." I wrote a program to do this automatically, but did not tell him, so I would just run it occasionally as part of my responsibilities. Anyway, I did a lot of stuff like this. I would estimate I saved about 15 hours of work every day on top of the 8.5 hours I did too. But then insert Sergeant F-Face. This was not the military, but I just like to call him that. We are having a team meeting when he shows up. White hair combed okayish, a scrunched face, glasses. He just sort of showed up one day and took notes during our morning meeting. At one point someone brought up a name of one of our customers. I said, "Oh, is that the 300-pound guy with a big beard?" Sort of as a joke because I mostly do back-end stuff. But there was a guy like this I recently did some entrance stuff for. Well, I was wrong and my boss said no, it's blah blah some other person. Okay, then we talked about that person a bit and fast forward about a week and this Sergeant FF is a complete douchebag to me. I don't know why, he will ignore me during group conversations and literally sometimes scoff at me. By the way, who actually scoffs at people? I was really having a rough week looking for some extremely important files. People were yelling all day, I was exasperated, too much to do, I was having anxiety attacks at home in the middle of the night, but it was Friday, so I was pulling through. As I looked for this file, I ended up deep on our file structure and the search returned a personal folder structure within one of the drives. I clicked out of curiosity and there it was, Sergeant FF's notes. I opened it and there was a whole section about me. This guy basically goes from location to location getting people fired to save the CEO's money. And he was working on me now. I scrolled through his notes and at the very top I saw Frosty, aka OP, thought a 5'10", 24-year-old female patient was a 300-pound bearded man. Clearly atrocious attention to detail. Well, that is just one example of how completely effed up his comments were. So in combination with my job, which I generally liked and enjoyed helping people, knowing I wasn't getting paid enough for my effort, this horrible week I had, and Sergeant F Face's comment, I said, F this. I set up 3 email configurations. 1 to my boss letting him know I'll be taking 2 weeks off vacation time to be sent at 10 PM tonight. Number 2 to the company letting them know that I'll not be present for 2 weeks, so whatever work they currently need me to do, they will need to do themselves. To be sent Monday morning at 4 AM. Number 3, for any emails that came in, I set an auto response that said, I'll be out for an unknown amount of time for any routine, emergency, or even occasional items. It's imperative that you reach out to Sergeant F Face at XXX for assistance. And then I turned off every automated task I'd ever set up. Then I swung by FF's temporary office and said, I think I found a way to make your job easier. He did not even really turn his head to look at me, but just raised one eyebrow, and then I left. I actually got multiple calls on Monday morning that I didn't answer. It didn't last long apparently, but I stayed strong and didn't respond to anything. On Wednesday, I had a little anxiety about it, but I stayed as strong as I could. I thought about the tasks that needed a 2-day turnaround, and there's no way some of the guys were keeping up with their normal duties. Well, guaranteed at least 2 people were no longer doing their normal jobs just to keep up with my automated tasks. I got a long email to my personal account, I guess from my resume or when I interviewed from my boss on Thursday night of the first week. It went something like this. Frosty, aka OP, I know you're a smart person and probably figured out what the company had us doing. I would say it's very important you call me, but that probably is not gonna work, I see. I've talked with Sergeant FF's boss and he'll be leaving our location. I explained our progress meetings seem to be going in the wrong direction and that you are one of our most valuable employees here. I'm sure you are probably looking at other jobs at this point, or maybe you have even started one, but I hope not. If you could please reach back to me, I would like to offer you a raise. It has become very apparent how useful you are around here. I hear about it every day, believe me. So guys, I came back on Monday with a $10,000 raise and Sergeant F Face out of my face. My boss apologized again in person and said he did not get a say in it. I think it's a little weird he could have a say after I left, but not before, but I sort of get it. And yeah guys, that is how you get a raise in style. Props to OP, that was absolutely legendary. Anyway, the next one is a neighbor internet drama story. So I recently got high-speed internet to my house after not having it for nearly a decade. I live in an area that has multiple options for broadband, but my house sits back about a mile off the public road, so most utilities need to be hardlined to work. Despite living on a large piece of property, my one and only neighbor is about 800 foot away from, due to the original owners being family members and wanting their homes to be semi-close. We get along but don't interact much. They have done some things that I consider rude, but they seem like generally okay people. When I first moved in, I worked a deal out with our local internet provider to run a main line to my home. If I could get the neighbor to sign up as well. Reason for that is they allow a certain allowance per customer for construction costs, and with 2 of us the total was high enough to cover everything. Now there's no contract, so they could cancel after the first month. And I offered to pay for their services for the first 3 months as a thank you. They declined and said they were happy with DSL. I explained they didn't have to get rid of anything, I just needed them to allow the line to be ran underground and sign on for a month minimum, and I would cover it. But still, no. We planned on buying a new house eventually, so I never had it installed as I didn't want to pay. With everything going on and working from home, I finally worked a deal out that if I did some of the construction, they would cover any extra costs for the installation. Now my neighbor sees what's going on and comes to ask about our new internet provider. I explained what I had to go through and that he could do the same if he wanted. Next thing I know, an installer is knocking on my door letting me know he's gonna lay cable across my driveway temporarily and that they will need to dig it up to go across permanently. I asked what he was talking about and he said he was installing cable for the neighbor. I said, no you're not from my property anyway. Now the neighbor is begging me to give them an easement for his cable drop. I said no for 2 reasons. Number 1, you screwed me years ago when I wanted cable originally, and number 2, I really don't want them digging into the driveway or having to mow around a wire on the yard all summer. I admit I'm being petty, but I don't think I'm an a-hole here. I mentioned it to a friend and they went off about how everyone is struggling and that I should be a good neighbor and stop being a spiteful a-hole. Just to add a couple things, because I've gotten so many questions, under the original deal 10 years ago, I approached the neighbors about a year after moving in. I explained that I noticed we were not serviceable by the cable company, so I approached them to find out what had to be done. I explained that the cable company had to agree to doing the work and that I would let them do everything on my property. The cable company required me to put a deposit of $10,000 down, which would be returned after we both got service to our homes. I explained that they didn't have to sign or do anything to proceed, but that I just needed them to sign up for service for a month once it was done so that I could get my deposit back. I offered to pay for that and also offered to pay for their first 3 months of service if they chose to permanently switch. They had zero interest in helping out. This alone has cost me $18,000 over the last 10 years. That deal no longer exists, and with rising costs of everything, I reached out to the cable company again to see what they could do. They agreed to cover above and beyond their normal allowance if I handled excavation. Construction costs were around $70,000, $60K of that was installing the hard line back to the PED where the services hook up. So basically I saved $60K by doing the work myself and the cable company covered the remainder. And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments whether you think OP is the a-hole here or not. I would love to hear your opinion. And now let's see what Reddit has to say. Comment number 1, not the a-hole. Your original offer was fair and would not have required anything from them. They chose not to take it, which negatively impacted you. They are now asking to inconvenience you way more than they would have been inconvenienced originally in order to take advantage of the work you had to put in because they would not originally help you. Comment number 2, not the a-hole. If your friend is so incensed on your neighbor's behalf, then they can help dig the trench or pay for the construction. You gave your neighbor a good offer the last they refused, and you have every right to refuse having your property disturbed for their benefit. If your neighbor wants to dig their own trench to lay cable, they can Google how to do it with their slowpoke DSL. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, that is one of the things I just love about Thailand. The internet here is so fast, and not just in the big cities. Even if you go to some mountain village, they have fiber there, and the internet is pretty much faster than in a European big city. Absolutely unbelievable. Anyway, the next one is a malicious compliance story. So my SUV was throwing error code, so we took it to the dealership to have them look at it. They informed us that the computer just needed a reset and everything was good. We did not believe them, so when we went to pick it up, my husband drove it around the parking lot, and just as we suspected, it was driving awful and now making a horrible noise. So we went back inside and told them they are wrong and to fix it properly. Several days later they called us back to say that they figured it out and it was definitely fixed now. Something to do with the transfer case, and a $2,000 bill later we are told it is fixed and we won't have any further issues. Great, I drive it away and I get error codes again. By this point we are beyond frustrated because this vehicle just keeps costing us money and is being nothing but issues for the past year or so. So then we take it to the dealership and tell them we would like to sell it. The lady evaluating it asks us if there's anything wrong with it, and I inform her that I just picked it up from your service department earlier today and they told us that it works perfectly. She takes the keys and goes out to look at it, comes back in and asks about flashing lights and some weird things. We agree with her and let her in on the story. We walk over to the service desk and inform them that their sales department won't buy it because there's something wrong with it, so why does the service department keep telling us that there's nothing wrong with it? He went so red and immediately went to speak with his manager. They ended up having to call the vehicle engineers to figure out how to fix it, and we only had to pay the cost on the part that apparently what actually would fix it. It was something to do with the computer, something that needs replacing after the transfer case goes. I cannot say for certain if it was finally fixed or not, because the day I picked it up, I traded it in for a different make. And before we end the video, let's read one last funny story from r/maliciouscompliance once again. It is titled, "Customer complained that I was rude." So for context, a couple weeks ago, my boss gave me a talking to. For reference, I work at a very small independent neighborhood coffee shop. I know most of the regulars by order, and the newbies I can generally give a good time to. This particular customer though, regular as she is absolute garbage. Rude, entitled, belittling, disrespectful, you name it. Usually I try to give minimal interaction, but one day I apparently didn't do things just right. So I get to work one day and the boss tells me he's gotten a complaint. Now, I've been here for almost 13 years and aside from the growing pains of starting what is the equivalent of a coffee shop version of a dive bar, I've had complaints that I can count on one hand. Anyway, he goes on to tell me that a customer has complained that I've been rude, dismissive, etc. I say, okay, I'll definitely be mindful of things with this customer moving forward. Well, cue my malicious compliance. Every single time I've seen her since, she gets the absolute over-the-top Stepford barista treatment. Think June Cleaver ratcheted up to 13, just pouring on the Midwestern nice like a thick saccharine syrup. I've been doing this for at least 2, maybe 2.5 weeks, and believe me when I say it drives me absolutely out of my mind to do it. It takes so much energy to treat this human this way. Except today. Today I gave her the exact same treatment as I have been, except today she made a crucial error. She let it slip that the way I talk to her is irritating. When I tell you I haven't had such a rush of happy brain chemicals in almost a decade, it is not a lie. And now that I know it annoys her, it'll keep happening. Because now it's not gonna take excess energy to do it, now it is fueled by spite. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my endless playlist on the left, otherwise I will see you again tomorrow.